What motivates today's philanthropists? Here's Sir Tom Hunter again.
It's the biggest pleasure and the biggest buzz I have in my life. It's great fun. And actually seeing your money making a difference during your lifetime must be one of the biggest thrills you can get.
One of the key words there is investment. In a previous age, philanthropists were criticised by those on the left who felt that charity couldn't solve society's problems. They argued that charitable giving was motivated by emotion and whim, that it lacked a strategy. The new philanthropists are different. They believe in targets and they want results that can be measured. Here's Mark Evans from Coutts.
More and more people are saying they want to get engaged because there's a sense of personal fulfillment, there's a sense of being able to make a real difference, there's a sense of being able to apply perhaps their business experience to a social issue, and they can do all of that and introduce perhaps other members of the family, prepare their children for the responsibilities of managing future wealth by getting everybody engaged. And what they find ultimately is that actually it's lots of fun. Giving away your money can be lots of fun, and lots of clients have said actually they're having more fun giving their money away than they had making it in the first place. And also the approach that they have is often quite different, and that is that they are looking for a creative way of making a difference. It's not just a case of writing out a check and posting it to a charity. They really want to get to grips more with the issues and see how it is that one might be able to perhaps introduce an entrepreneurial solution to a social issue to be able to tackle the problem.
One of the world's leading business schools recently appointed its first philosopher in residence. John Armstrong is now working with the students and graduates at Melbourne Business School. Born in Glasgow and educated at Oxford, John Armstrong's most recent book was Love, Life, Goethe: How to be Happy in an Imperfect World. He believes philanthropists are motivated by a desire to make the world a better place.
And I suppose that motive is part of a vision of being a good individual. Why am I a good individual? Because I'm trying to make the world a better place. It sounds, in a way, a very simple-minded statement, make the world a better place, but I really do believe that that is the underlying motive, that people who have made a lot of money, have a great deal of respect for money and also for their own abilities, want to use those resources to do something that they believe will be genuinely good for the world.
Public attitudes to the super-rich are complex. The British media is often dazzled by the glamour of celebrities and their wealth. At times, New Labour, the party of Tony Blair, seemed to have an almost romantic attachment to millionaires and billionaires. But cynicism is never far away. One business tycoon, who's promised to give away hundreds of millions of pounds, complained recently that the media in the UK would damn him if he kept the money and accuse him of seeking publicity or a tax write-off if he gave it away. So how much moral or social pressure can be applied to the self-made super-rich? John Armstrong says this isn't a new issue.
It was a very, very urgent problem in the 19th century. For example, Disraeli, the Prime Minister, in the second half of the 19th century, was obsessed with what he thought of as the irresponsibility of the aristocracy and was very, very keen to find ways of influencing them so that they would use their resources in a way that he thought was more constructive for the country. And his approach to that was to write novels, which were kind of like manuals of how to be a good aristocrat. And he thought that he could influence people that way. Slightly later on in the 19th century, there was a great deal of anxiety at the arrival of extremely large and quickly made fortunes coming from, particularly from South Africa, mineral wealth, and there was a kind of crisis of how are these great fortunes going to impact upon the country. And for a while there was a sort of standoff between the new money and the old, and gradually the existing kind of established culture found ways of absorbing that new wealth into its existing set of concerns. And that was done in curious ways through, I suppose, social prestige. there was enough social pressure to say, well, you may have made all this money, but you're not a respectable person until you buy into the cultural norms of the existing elite. Now, that's an example of indirect social pressure, which had a great deal of consequence for the ways in which those individuals thought about themselves. So they would give lots of money to Oxford colleges and things like that in a way of sort of buying respectability. I'm not quite sure where we are today in terms of sort of parallel to that 19th century issue.
I don't know about you, but I find the idea of Gordon Brown using his weekends to write a novel designed to persuade Britain's new entrepreneurs to become philanthropists strangely attractive. But the emergence of the super-rich raises some difficult questions. Powerful people with a lot of money and used to having their own way may not take kindly to the checks and balances that governments might like to exert over them. John Armstrong again.
The situation has been made more complex by a sense of taboo among our sort of intellectual world, among the, as it were, the holders of traditional knowledge, which would be to say, look, really there shouldn't be billionaires. What is a good way to use $1 billion is really just a question that, as it were, our intellectual culture has not wanted to ask itself because it wanted to deny the premise. It's wanted to say, well, obviously you should just take it all off them in taxation. So the issue of how should large fortunes, which are in the completely under the control of individuals, how can a society engage fruitfully with that? That's just not an issue that we've been good at dealing with.
And how do philanthropists react to the idea that they should be accountable to governments and regulators? Matthew Bishop of The Economist.
I think one of the attractions of being a philanthrocapitalist probably is that you feel you can solve a problem on your own. You don't need to worry about being a politician. And I think that they're going to have to learn that, particularly the bigger philanthrocapitalists like Bill Gates or Sir Tom Hunter, they're going into places and they're really changing things in a way that has political implications. And I don't think you can go about behaving in ways that are political without having to be accountable to the people whose lives you're affecting. And so I think this is going to be one of the big challenges over the next 10, 20 years, is how do we, in a world of growing inequality, encourage the winners, the rich, to involve themselves in society's problems without doing that in a way that undermines fundamental political rights that have been won over the centuries.
The other side of the question is one politicians will have to address. The growth of philanthropy could tempt some governments to withdraw from their traditional roles. The clearest evidence of this so far has been in the arts and culture. The philanthropists we spoke to stressed that they wanted to work with governments and weren't suggesting taking over policy areas from the state. It's all far more complicated than dropping coins in a tin on Flag Day. There, we must leave it. Until next week, goodbye.